So this is the group of criminals that made the trip. For those of you who don't recognize the guy, he doesn't have his champion shirt on, so we'll just introduce Dan Bach over here. You know Mickey and I, the young lady that's with us, is our oldest daughter. She attends the West Side Church of Christ in Bakersfield, and they also have missionaries that are affiliated with the works that we're doing over there as well. So she came, and they provided supplies and materials as well. We took those with us, and we'll talk a little bit about that. As you can see, I put a little briefing up there mainly to remind me to tell you that we've raised about $130,000. That number keeps kind of going up a little bit. And that we have spent about 23 of that. 13 of that money was spent for trauma kits. And we took $10,000 cash with us so that they would have the opportunity to use it for humanitarian needs over there. Not everything in the banking system today works well. So sometimes cash is king. A little nuance to that story, and by the way, Bob Burkle and I deal with this quite a bit. I was sharing with Bob that of the $10,100 bills worth of cash we took, the bank wouldn't accept about $700 worth because the bills were wrinkled. And you go, really? You're worried about wrinkled U.S. dollars, but they wouldn't accept them. So the way things are working over there, you have to kind of be very flexible. Even with the cash that we took, we had to deal with some of the nuances. For those of you who didn't see what we took, these are the supplies on our left. Those are the trauma kits that are in black, and the goods that are in the boxes were supplied to us by other various churches that wanted to supply goods. And there's everything in there from toothpaste and toothbrushes to aspirin to you name it. And they just knew, the churches knew that there would be needs beyond the trauma kits. So believe it or not, we were able to get all of that stuff packed into the containers that you see on the right, and convince the airport that we were going to be able to ship those with us over to the east. So it all made it, in some state of disrepair, but it all made it. And that very elegant-looking truck on the left is Dan's beast of a car, his truck. It took my pickup and his pickup to get all of those carts, or those containers, into the airport, and then that's what we had to convince the airport that it was going to be okay that we ship. It was some conversation. We flew Turkish Airways. After they realized what we were doing, they were a lot more accommodating, I can tell you. So, and then the stuff on the right that you see there, the blue bags are from the church in California. They specifically were asked by the drivers, who we're going to talk a little bit about later, to provide them with certain things, and things that we wouldn't even think are important. But for example, all the drivers over there in Ukraine wanted beef jerky. We will. Oh, by the way, and we have a story about beef coming up later, but beef jerky was important to them. And sunglasses and the things that you take for granted every day, they can't get. And so the church over there got them also things like, 5-hour drinks and the things they were asking for that we didn't want to take. So this is the route that we took, for those of you who are curious. We flew from DFW to Istanbul, Turkey, laid over there a little bit, got on another flight from Turkish Airlines, went to Bucharest, Romania, and from Bucharest, we went through the border and into Ukraine through there, and I'll show you here in just a second that it wasn't as simple as we thought. We now are at the airport in Bucharest. You've all been through the airport. We have 5 carts full of those containers that you saw. There's now 9 of them instead of 7, because our daughter brought 2 of them. We've got these carts. We pushed them through the airport because we are at the other end of the airport in Bucharest. We had to go all the way to the far end to get the local flight in Romania. from Bucharest into a city called Suceava. And it is 9 o'clock at night. And there are no ticket agents who want to talk to us. But we have reservations, so we decided, we got there, Mickey and I and Dan and Melissa, we're trying to talk to this lady, and she's not wanting to give them a boarding pass. So we arrived at the decision that Dan and Melissa would go to Suceava on the airplane. And you'll see that I've distinguished between what Mickey and I did and what Dan and Melissa did. So what were you, what was your feeling of trying to get on that airplane?
Is this working?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. It was no big deal because he sent his daughter to babysit me the whole time. So I just, went along with her. She knew what she was doing. I don't know if you've met Melissa, but she's really impressive, and she's got it together. So I just followed her wherever she went. But, yeah, it was a little tiny plane, and got on it and flew. It was no big deal. We had a much easier time than these two because these two had to go to the hotel because they wouldn't take the luggage, and then they had to figure out how to get the luggage into the hotel, and then they had to get it back into a car, rent a car, get it all packed up, and then drive 6 hours to where we were. And while they did that, then Melissa and I took her stuff by hand and crossed the border on foot to meet their missionaries, and then came back. And again, I didn't do a lot except I just kind of watched after Melissa and just did what she told me to do.
We all do that, by the way, we've learned. This year, by the way, just for those of you who follow all this, Melissa, our oldest, just got her PhD from Texas Tech. So we're trying to get her to Texas. We're trying our best.
Yeah, we called her Dr. Melissa the whole time.
So what you see here is the packing that had to take place. And we're going to share with you a lot of stories that are anecdotal. They probably don't mean a lot to you as it relates to the mission work itself, but we found them to be, there's always fun to be had. Here we're in the city of Suceava. To give you an idea, that's about an hour from the Ukrainian border. And we had a hotel set up. The reason that Dan and Melissa had to go ahead of us was that we had reservations at this hotel, and if we didn't show up, the refugee or the volunteer situation is such that we would have lost the rooms that we had reserved. They would just give them away and put somebody else in them. So Dan and Melissa went to secure those rooms while Mickey and I had a hotel at the airport. And that's what Dan's talking about. We took all of this stuff. We pushed these carts, along with a couple of young men that we bribed, to push these carts across the parking lot at the airport in the middle of the night to the hotel that we had, and we stored them in our room so that we could pack them up the next day. And all of that had to go in that little car. And it was easier when it was just Mickey and I. When we got to Suceava, we gained 2 more people and the luggage for 2 more people. And Dan and I were sort of wagering with my daughter, about whether or not we were going to have to strap stuff to the top of the car, because now it's packed to begin with. Mickey and I did everything we could do to pack that thing in there. We're gaining 2 people, and Melissa said, it's going to all go in the back.
So I come down for breakfast. They're sitting there, and Ron says, we barely got this in with 2 people. Do you believe we can get 2 more people and our luggage in this car? And I was like, no way. I said, I know you're Superwoman, but there's no way you're getting 4 of us. We were wrong. She got it all in there and spared. So we didn't doubt her anymore after that.
So, and as Dan said, we left Suceava driving 6 hours to get to Ivano-Frankivsk. So we actually crossed the border with all of this, and we're going to talk a little bit about that border crossing. But before I do, I just want to make sure, since this is a class environment, guys, if you want to talk about, ask questions. If you're curious, if it's something that just comes to mind while we're talking, we want to make sure we answer your questions. We think we've covered most of them that we've thought about. But the next part of this trip was trying to get through to Ukraine. And the photos that you see here are kind of two parts. So those on the left and the center are the first day when Dan and Melissa went across. And Dan, you want to explain sort of the walk across that you did and what you guys saw?
Yeah, it was pretty uneventful because once they found out we were Americans and we waited there, they pretty much just let us through, didn't check our baggage, anything. They were pretty much looking through everything of everybody else's, so that was kind of nice. We probably walked, I don't know, half a mile across there, and there was like this 7-Eleven thing. They have a lot of 7-Elevens, and it's weird. I call them 7-Elevens. There were different names on all of them, but they looked just like you're in America. It was very strange, new gas, pretty nice, and we met their missionaries there, and everybody was very, very excited to see us. I think that they feel so alone, like isolated, that the world doesn't care, no one cares. They're sending some supplies, but no people. So they were all hugging us. Some of them cried to see us, and it was a nice meeting with them, and to just encourage them. And they were thankful for the supplies, but I really think they liked seeing us more than they liked the supplies.
Mickey, thoughts? Not much. So I'll give you some details. So on the left side, what you see there is the road going to the border crossing. There are actually 2 border crossings that you have to make. On the pictures that you see on the left side there is the drive from the Romanian side going to the Romanian border. And there are tents set up, there's all this stuff. And really what it is to try to give services and help to the Ukrainians that are crossing from the other way, not from us going into Ukraine. So those tents are actually services and goods, and you might get food, and they're just trying to help them. So Romania is doing a lot to try to help. As you cross the border, you then are in no man's land for a little while. We'll show you some photos of that in a second. But from no man's land, you go from the Romanian border to the Ukrainian border, and I can tell you there's a couple of scary moments in there. You'll see in that lower left-hand photo a little piece of paper. Well, you should be aware, you should know that I might have needed some extra prayers on this trip. I rented a car at the airport in Bucharest, and the guy was very, very clear. You cannot take this car out of the country. Well, I didn't intend to, but it was an accident that we crossed the border. They took a great deal of time to look at the paperwork for the car. More than I've ever seen anybody do. They looked us over. In fact, we were in the Romanian side line for quite a while. They looked at our paperwork, and you have to have that slip of paper to go between one border and the other border. You have to have been inspected. You have to have all this done. They've looked at your passports. We finally were there so long that the guy behind us, very nice gentleman, said, if you just move up a little bit, we can get by you and we can go, because they were all getting approved while we were waiting. And finally, they talked, I guess, amongst themselves, and they finally decided that it was going to be okay. Primarily, I think, because they overlooked the rental car issue and because of what we were carrying. That's really what I think it came down to. And then the rest of this is, so if you look in that center top row, that's us going into the border side of Ukraine. So now all of a sudden it's going to get pretty serious, and I'll tell you why. We, at one point, on the Romanian side, they stuck that piece of paper in one of our passports. We didn't know it, and we didn't know we needed the piece of paper. So we got to the other border, the Ukrainian border, and this young man said, "Where's your paper?" Kind of in broken English. "We don't have it. We can't find it. You have to go back." We figured out that was a very important piece of paper, and I mean with a lot of haste. We went through all those passports and found that they had slipped it in there, but they're very, very particular about who goes in. We were a little surprised, but the first question we got asked when they first questioned us was, "Are you military?" So I don't know what they thought we were going to answer, but clearly we weren't. But they're asking a lot of people, what is it? Why are you here? What's causing you to be here? So, and then this lower right-hand photo is the first introduction to Ukraine. When you drive across the border into Ukraine, that pillbox right there is the first thing you see, and you'll see lots of them. Not in every single town, but in most towns, there's an emplacement that they've built to protect themselves if they have to. So they do believe that they're in pretty dire straits. And then these are, I threw them in so you'd get a bigger sense of sort of what I was talking about in terms of protection. Dan convinced in the lower right-hand corner, Dan convinced those three young men who are not supposed to take pictures, and we are not supposed to have photographs that you see here. They allowed it, and these young guys said, yeah, sure, we'll get up there and take a photo. So as we were in Ivano-Frankivsk, which is where our missionaries are at the moment, then these emplacements that you see there and in the center photo are all from Ivano. And the city is really buttoned up. Everything is sandbagged to the extent that they can. So the lower center photograph is Bob's favorite hotel. For those of you who don't know, by the way, does everybody know who Bob Burkle is, by the way? If you don't, the gentleman there in that very nice coat, sport coat, is the head of EEM. Eastern European Missions is very much involved over there. Bob has done tons of work of getting Bibles into Ukraine, and so he's been there many times. And we make fun of this because there's a couple of hotels in the city of Ivano. One of them is really nice. That's where Dan stayed. And the other is where I stayed in this hotel. And this hotel, what you see there is there's a piece of artwork in the front of what's called the Nadia Hotel, and they've sandbagged it because they are so concerned that Russia is simply going to start dropping bombs just indiscriminately, that they have sandbagged pretty much anything of value. And then in the lower left hand is just a city we were driving by. I have no idea where we were in Ivano or in Ukraine. But you'll see that young man's carrying an AK-47, and he's behind those sandbags, and you'll see those everywhere as well. So it's kind of an interesting situation. Now, I put a couple in here. The three that are clustered, and I know you can't see them very well, but those are churches, and I'm going to hand this off to Dan because Dan's favorite topic are these churches.
It was just impressive that, or maybe not. These beautiful churches, I bet we saw 500 of them in a country that's not that wealthy, and they were big, beautiful. Some of them weren't finished, but they had all those beautiful tops and stuff. I mean, you'd see a town of 10 people, and the houses are falling down, and yet you'd see one of those, and it was just uncanny to me to see them. And then sometimes they'd have just one little, maybe 10 by 10 or 8 by 8 room that went straight up with one dome on it in people's backyards. Mm-hmm. It was really something. I couldn't get over it, but they were all just as gorgeous as you could imagine.
John? So there's both. There's not necessarily Russian. There are a few, but it's Ukrainian Orthodox. And there are Christian churches, Orthodox Christian churches there as well. So it's hard to determine which is which. You can tell by the cross. If they're Orthodox, they have an extra little piece at the bottom. And if it's Ukrainian Orthodox, it has a standard cross.
Yeah, it kind of goes like that at the bottom for some reason.
But they're all very ornate. It is incredible. There's more gold in those domes, I think, than in Fort Knox. But
So what we were told, because I was like, how can these people afford all this? They're told that if they build it, that all their sins will be forgiven and they'll go to heaven. So they got a lot of people contributing to it, a lot of rich people building them for them. Anybody with some money, they build them.
And the other thing that I think is worth noting, and if you spend any time just watching people, which we did a lot, the building is very important to them over there. The building is the icon that they, quote, worship. And you'll see them walk by a building in the middle of nowhere and see the building, and they'll cross themselves. So it's the building that they recognize, which is quite different than we believe in here. So, and then I know many of you here are familiar with Anya and Jenya. If you're not, Anya and Jenya were actually here for a couple of years at Grapevine. We got to know them. Their youngest is a Texan, and we're trying to get that Texan here. But this is their home. For many of you who've wondered, well, what's their situation? There are a number of churches of Christ. We work with them, particularly in Texas, but all over. In this case, the A&M Church in College Station has actually purchased this house for them so they would have a place to live. And it's on the outskirts of Ivano-Frankivsk. So it's kind of new development outside on the outskirts of town. But you can see it has a lot of land. It's a very nice home. It's a brand new home. And when we walked in, there were shoes everywhere. You take your shoes off in their house, and shoes are everywhere. Well, some of us do. And we couldn't figure out, well, why do you have so many pairs of shoes? Well, their upstairs is full of refugees. So they're not just using it for their house. They're actually hosting refugees in the home that they were provided. So yeah, and it's a full house all the time. So that's their place. And then we wanted to talk a little bit. This is actually the mission. We're getting now into why in the world did we make this trip. Those top photos are about 25, I think, young men that are actually now from all over the country have come to the church in Ivano. And they're driving from Ivano back to the war zone, and then either taking supplies like those trauma kits we showed you or other supplies, food, taking them to the war zone, and then bringing back people that need to get out of the war zone and go either cross the border or get some help. Those are the young men that we were trying to help with this particular part of the mission. We had a chance, after a church service, we had a chance to sit down with them, and I'll just share with you that of the, I probably talked personally with about half a dozen of them who had pretty good English, I think. How many of you have seen or have heard of the city of Mariupol? You probably heard it on the news. Mariupol is now basically leveled. Putin has destroyed the city. About half a dozen of those young people actually left Mariupol, came to the church, and now they're driving back into that area to try to help people get out. So they needed some help, and what they asked us for were trauma kits. So that's what we set about to provide, and we found a source that would help us. The lower two photos is the interior of our church building over there, and the church is now housing these young people. They're throwing mattresses on the floor. They're just trying to find a place to stay while they're in between doing their drives and sleeping. So they are quite active at trying to get this work done.
It's really impressive. They all have a twin mattress, and they throw them all down and sleep there at night. And then they have all their little, the young people have all their secret networks that they can text each other and get all the information. And they go where they have one kitchen, one bathroom, one shower. They all live there. And then come church time, they all pick out those mattresses and put them in a room and clean the place up, and they have church. And then as soon as church is over, they throw them all back down, and it's pretty impressive. These young men, they're very brave and impressive young men to do this.
And so this is sort of the beginning of trying to get them acquainted with trauma kits. And the reason we took them was twofold. One is they needed to be able to take care of themselves, and the second is the remainder of them are being taken into the country. They need to be able to explain to whoever they give them to how to use them. It's not as simple as just, here it is, here's a Band-Aid. These would be military-grade trauma kits. And so they're starting to unpack them. And then part of the process was to make sure that they understood it fully. And so these series of photos are all around a training class. We brought the young man in the center, top center photo, is an military EMT. And this guy was quite something, I will tell you. He wasn't very big, and he's throwing around these 220-pound guys like they're nothing, because he's trying to explain to them in a war situation, how do you get near somebody, how do you drag them out of a hazardous situation and give them the care that they need. And so, let's see if I put one in here. So in the upper right-hand corner, for those of you who don't know Zhenya, he's one of our missionaries, the preacher in the church there, and he's showing him how to deal with a neck wound, with a gunshot wound. And then in the lower center is probably the biggest guy in the room, a guy by the name of Dennis, and he picks on the biggest guy. He's actually going to pick him and roll him over and move him out while he's trying to give him medical care. He's just quite a impressive young man. So they got taught how to use pretty much everything in the kits that we took. And I think you heard something about the quality of the kits.
Oh, yeah, the guy said it was the highest quality kits, and we were very relieved because we weren't 100% positive this is exactly what they need. This guy said this is exactly what we need, and that every kit, he said he guaranteed would save a life, every single kit. And this guy was impressive. I think he had like 2% body fat, and I mean, you could tell he was really nice, but he could hurt you fast if you. It was like, whoa.
So that was a training class. The training class was held at the Devchenko's home, and so they were able to get the drivers all educated. And then we had a few experiences of our own that we thought we'd share with you. So while the cities that we went to were not at any risk of being at war, or it could be at any time, but we didn't see any evidence of it while we were there, it wasn't to say that there wasn't a risk. And again, just trying to share with you sort of what we went through. Some of us were in this horrible hotel, the Hotel Nadia, for 4 nights. Some of us were there 2 nights. So, and there's a story there, you might imagine. So if you're in a hotel 4 stories or higher, when that alarm goes, when that air raid siren goes off, you have to evacuate the building and you have to go to a bomb shelter. If you're in a hotel 4 stories or lower, you don't have to do that necessarily unless you just want to. So the first 2 nights, we're there and the air raid sirens go off pretty routinely. And so you see what a bomb shelter looks like in downtown Ivano. Now, I wish I could have blown these up, but you get the idea. We were in what I would consider pre-USSR time. This thing, I think, was built, shortly after Jesus walked the earth. It was a mess, and we were stuck down there for an hour or 2 sometimes at a time.
Yeah, I never got stuck that long, but I will say that I didn't get nervous really on the trip too much at all. But the first night, because our first night there was no air warnings. The second night at 2:30 in the morning when that air warning went off, I went, seriously? And then I was like, ooh, okay, here we are, because I was quite concerned they were actually going to drop some bombs. But anyway, it was a little bit unnerving to be told to go down. We won't. I'll tell you all later individually, but I got lost on my way down.
So yeah, slightly lost. But that was, he decided that was too much of a bother. So there's a really, really nice hotel that had one room left that Dan could get, and he was in the hotel that didn't require you to go out for the air raids. So we were reminded pretty regularly that, you know what, I didn't have to go out last night. This was 3 nights in a row for us. We had to do this. And I will say, I didn't put the photo up or the video, but I did want to tell you sort of visually, if you shut your eyes, if you can imagine, we had to walk from another building back to the hotel because that's where the bomb shelter was. And I think what struck me the most was you're walking across a parking lot and there is not a single light on in town. And you can hear the sounds that are going on. And I mean, there's not a car, there's not a light, and you're holding your flashlight basically to try to walk across the parking lot. It's really struck you as this is very much real. And they are seriously taking it as being a real risk. Ivano had been bombed at the airport, and Lviv, another city that we went to, was bombed at the airport, but not downtown. So it's not as though they couldn't have bombed it. They just chose not to. So in the interest of time, I think we're probably going to make this. We did have church service. We wanted to share with you that the church service was very well attended. As you can see in that upper photo on the left, the church property was full, and they held class in the morning. We have several folks that are helping the church there. So there's a gentleman by the name of Valery. He and his wife, Anya and Jenya, are basically responsible for this particular church. And then we have Oleg and Eldar, 2 of our other missionaries. And Oleg was in the church as well. So we had pretty much all of our church family was there. And then everybody else are just people from the community that have decided that this is the place to be. And I couldn't resist. I don't know how well you can see that lower right-hand photo, but one of the church things that we got to do, and we'll talk a little bit more about that if time permits, is we got to visit mosques. I was really surprised, and I don't know if you can tell who Dan's bud and Mickey are buddying up to there, but boy, they really put on a show. Those guys look like they were from Israel back in Jesus' time. They were walking around with the walking stick and the whole thing, but that was in a mosque that we got to visit.
It was in, they call it Haggai, Hagia Sophia, which is the world's largest mosque. Mm-hmm. So a friend of mine that I do business with lives in Istanbul. So when we got there the second time, he came, and he used to be a tour guide, and he gave us a tour of Istanbul, and I got to tell you, I was really, really impressed with Istanbul. It was really impressive and fun to see that. So we did get a little fun in.
And then, of course, I threw these in just to let you know that we didn't starve on this trip. For those of you who think a mission trip is supposed to be, some heartfelt, difficult challenge, it was if you wanted a hamburger, but short of that, we pretty much ate everything we could. We'll talk a little bit about that story too, but I just wanted to kind of give you a random sampling of some of the imagery in the lower portion of this, and the sort of the photo to the left of Dan is actually a small grocery store. And one of the things I wanted to share with you guys is that the grocery stores today still are stocked in the West. Of course, there are no grocery stores left in the East. For the most part, those cities are decimated. But they still have food today, and we want to talk a little bit before we close about what's the need, what do we see as the next need. But we were making fun of Dan, so the stuff that you see here are places that we were able to either eat or visit. And the one that Dan has there, his favorite place is Burger King. I got to share one more story with you. He hates Burger King, by the way. We were at the airport, And he came walking back with this Burger King thing, and he had not been able to get a hamburger on the entire trip in Ukraine. He would ask, and we took him to places where in the past we had been able to get a really good hamburger. Maybe it's because of the war, but he got chicken. He got other things other than hamburger, but he's still waiting for that hamburger. We went back to Sachava before we left, and I had made friends with the waitress that was there in this restaurant, and Dan hadn't come down yet. And I said to this lady, I said, when he comes in, please tell him you're out of beef. Her English was pretty good. And so he came and sat down, and he's looking at the menu, and she said, oh, I just have to tell you, we don't have any beef tonight. And Dan looked so forlorn, I'm telling you, it was awesome. And so she did ask us, she says, so how long do I have to do this? And we said, just till we tell you. And so he looks and looks and looks, and he picks something, and she goes, well, I'm just telling you, we do have beef. He ordered the biggest steak you could find. So it was a good trip from that standpoint. We ate well, and the food in Ukraine is really special. You've probably even heard of things like borscht, and you probably think, oh my goodness, it's horrible. Basically, it's a really, really good soup. But that's all it is. It just has a different name. And we had it it was prepared for us in a number of places in different ways.
It was really good, the soup, the borscht. It was very good.
These are images of places that on our way out. So we had made, in order to get out of Bucharest on the plane, we got overnight. So we made use of every minute that we had. Some of these photos are from Old Town Bucharest. Some are from, these are from Istanbul. We spent 24 hours waiting for the next flight, so we took advantage of going everywhere we could. And you can see a number of these are mosques that we were able to visit, even to the extent that we got to visit a mosque that was in prayers, and they let us take photographs and talk to people, and it was, it was an experience I guess I wasn't expecting. The traffic in that lower right-hand picture is very typical of what we found in Istanbul, and it was horrible, and there's no way to sugarcoat that one. So before we close out, I think what we wanted to do, though, too, was to make sure you all knew that there's a need that we're going to continue to try to fulfill as a group. No one church is going to be able to do everything that's going to be required over there. We asked them what the vision was, and we got a lot of different answers to that question. It's pretty clear that there is no single vision of how these people are going to repatriate. So there are 4 million people that have left the country. They're either in Germany, Romania, Slovakia, Poland, of course, has a lot of them. Poland basically is full. And the war's still going on, they're going to stay there. So the question that we've been asking both over there and churches here is, well, what's next? So what we're beginning to advise people, if you're asked the question, one of the things that we're advising people is, for those of you who were here at the time, we did a thing called Pack Shack. And Pack Shack, last Sunday, was it last Sunday? We packaged up some dried foods for Nicaragua. Well, there's a company that does that as well, called Pack Shack, and in discussing with them, they think that they're going to be just fine with food, and we're convinced after being there that that is not the case. When this war ends, it's being forecast that 30% of the land will not be able to be planted. If that's the case, they won't have enough food, and if you don't know, they also feed Europe. So they won't have a lot of exports, they won't have a lot of local food, and then their supply chain in the East is broken. So what we're asking people to do is, if a church friend of yours asks if they've collected money and don't know what to do with it, the first thing they could do is have their church put together a Pack Shack-like event. Let us know, we'll help them. We were able to meet with people that are from a group called Convoy of Hope. They will take whatever we do and ship it to Ukraine for free. So having food that they can distribute and will last for a year is pretty important, is going to be important as the next step. The next long-term step is, and one of the things that we're considering now with A&M Church, ourselves, a church in Colorado, several of us that we're working with, we're considering looking at a property that would let these children who are going to be orphans of this war have a place to go for the summer, giving them a little bit of relief from all of this turmoil. We're working on whether that's a possibility or not. So that's probably the longer term approach. There was some bigger ideas thrown out. We couldn't afford to do what those visions had, but we can do this one as a group. So it's pretty close to time we're supposed to be done. Whatever questions you guys have, we'd like to be able to answer them if we can. Yes, ma'am? Sure. So the question that Sharon's asking is, we have 2 family missionaries that we support. Oleg and Eldar have 3 children, and those 3 children right now are, I know that's not the question, I'm answering more than you ask. They are actually in Romania. The men cannot leave. If you're 18 to 60 years old, you can't leave the country. So the men are staying there, the ladies have left with the children, and Anya and her children are in Romania. Albina, Oleg's wife, and 2 children are in Poland, and they're about 2 hours outside of Ukraine. They stopped there. Their original goal was to go to Spain, and they chose not to go that far, so they've stopped there, and they're in a small city that I can't pronounce, but they're in Poland.
Awesome.
Yes. So again, I'm going to take more time than you guys probably want to allow me. But so Eldar is one of our other missionaries. He's the brother of Oleg. He's very fluent. He's a translator. He can translate for English to Ukraine and Russian, and he's just very good. But when all of this broke out, we had a come to Jesus talk with them and said they lived about maybe less than an hour from the Russian border. And Kim, my wife, had to listen to me preach the sermon, you guys need to get out of there right now. And they didn't want to leave, as most of these people in the East, to be found, have not wanted to leave. So finally, we got them to go to Ivano. In the West, it's safe. He was there for 2 weeks. He didn't bother to ask anybody. He went back to Karakova, which is now, it's flat. And I called him and I said, I don't understand, what are you guys doing? Well, Oleg, the older brother, didn't want to go until he heard the first bombs. I said, you're going to hear them tomorrow. And so Eldar, to your question, where's Eldar? He said, I am not my brother. He got on a train, and the first place he went to was Kiev, the place that's being bombed. The train station was the first place they were trying to hit. He's sitting in the train station, and he finally gets out, but he actually got in a worse position than he was. He ended up about a stone's throw from the Slovakian border, and until last week, we couldn't get him to leave because there's no sirens going off. There's nothing going on over there. He finally, this week, Sharon, he is now back in Ivano, and he's helping the missions work in Ivano. So, other questions?
The only thing I wanted to add was I was really impressed with how all the churches are working together very, very well. I hadn't seen it work together that well. It's kind of like, well, we got this goal. We can't worry about our differences. We just got to work together. And one of the things that Melissa and I did while we were waiting, the day that we were waiting, is we went over to a house that the Texas A&M church had leased, and we got it ready, and we built a lot of beds and stuff for refugees and people to stay, and that's where Anya and the 3 kids are staying right now in Romania. So that was another part of the story that everyone is trying to do their part, which is very refreshing.
Okay, I think we're supposed to be done. So thank you guys very much. And we're going to continue to update you on what we learn, but guys, you've been instrumental in helping a lot of families with those trauma kits to survive. So we appreciate everything y'all have done.